There's an argument out there that audiobooks don't count as reading. If you ask me, the crux of the argument is the level of difficulty. Listening to an audiobook is comparatively easy, almost passive, whereas reading a physical or digital book requires proactive engagement. This shift in thinking seems to have happened in recent years. Before, people would say, I listened to the audiobook, whereas now you often hear, I read it on audiobook. While I'm not here to weigh in on the debate over audiobooks, a similar argument and shift in perception is happening with the rewind features you find in gaming, and to a lesser extent, save states. Rewind allows players to backtrack several seconds to undo their previous action, while save states offer a similar mechanic with slightly less convenience. Then, of course, there are quick saves and the standard save systems. Nobody questions those. Let's untangle this a bit. In the days of arcades, you'd put a quarter in and play as long as you could without dying. Once you inevitably lost, you had to insert another quarter or walk away. Even if you used a ton of quarters to reach the end, no one would claim that you hadn't earned your way through that game. That was just how they were designed. We now know that some developers intentionally made games harder to maximize profits. That was just the business model. When games transitioned to home consoles, things changed. Developers and publishers made their money from a single sale rather than an ongoing revenue stream. In the early days, there were no DLCs or microtransactions, so there was less incentive to make games brutally difficult, yet many still were. As games became longer and more complex, the need for a way to resume progress became clear. Thus, password and save systems were introduced, allowing players to continue their journey without starting over each time. This became the norm for decades. In fact, it would be strange for an RPG or a challenging game to not have some form of save system. It's worth mentioning that the entire roguelike genre is built around the idea of restarting over and over again, which shows that variations of save mechanics are widely accepted, even if they're taken for granted. As saving became standard, attitude towards how games should be played began to shift. Emulators have long included quick saves, often via a hotkey. And with the rise of handheld FPGA devices like the Analog Pocket or Retroid Pocket, save states are more common than ever. My first experience with save states was through emulation, and it made playing older games so much smoother. The difficulty itself didn't change, and that's a separate discussion, one I won't dive into today about, quote, easy modes in games. But I will say that save states encourage me to keep playing. If I reached a frustrating section where I repeatedly died, and getting back to that point requires unnecessary time and effort, I'm more likely to quit the game. If I'm battling against the enemies rather than a tedious reload loop, I'll stick with the game longer. If dying in a game means waiting over and over or redoing a long section you already beat, it becomes frustrating. We all hate long spawn times, load times, and unskippable cutscenes. This brings us to Rewind. I think its popularity has surged recently with Nintendo Switch Online's retro game collection. The Rewind feature has become one of my favorites. Growing up, my brother and I played Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, but we never beat it. A few years ago, I finally completed it on original hardware, and it took me forever. I enjoyed the challenge, but part of me just wanted to prove I could do it. I can confidently say I would have had a better time if I could have undone some of my mistakes quickly. Zelda 2 is a perfect example of why Rewind is a game changer. During COVID lockdowns, I replayed it using NSO's Rewind feature and had an absolute blast. The game clicked for me in new ways, and I gained a newfound appreciation for what many consider the weakest entry in the Zelda series. A coworker mentioned they were also playing it, but sheepishly admitted that they were using save states and Rewind. I immediately encouraged them, do it, otherwise they wouldn't have experienced the game at all, and I wouldn't have had the chance to reappraise and reappreciate it myself. Like I said, some entire genres, such as Souls-like, are built around replaying sections over and over due to difficulty and lack of save or rewind features. If I know what I'm getting into, I can enjoy that challenge. Difficult games can still be fun. For example, Lies of P, which I played on Game Pass, was a great time. But then there are games designed almost entirely around rewind mechanics. Prince of Persia from the 2000s is a good example. Another more recent example would be Catherine by Atlus, which features an undo mechanic that is integral to its gameplay. I recently played Catherine for the first time, and while it's a weird game, it's also incredibly entertaining. You play as Vincent, a man caught in a love triangle. During the day, it's a life sim where you make relationship choices. At night, in your nightmares, you climb towers of blocks to escape monsters. If you make a wrong move, you can undo it to keep climbing. I can't imagine how difficult this game would be without that feature. I probably would have quit. So yeah, I think the biggest objection to using Rewind when it's available is that it's supposedly cheating or not playing the game as intended. But as we've seen, Rewind is just a faster version of saving, a feature that was once a novelty. Save systems, quick saves, and variations of them define entire genres, while other games are built around them. So why should we shun Rewind? I think we could just be honest and say, I played through Zelda 2 with Rewind, just like we might acknowledge playing with mods or using a Game Genie if you're old enough to remember that. If Rewind makes a game easier, so be it. More people will play, more copies will sell, and perhaps we'll see sequels that might not have otherwise existed. If you love difficult games, you should embrace Rewind. It ensures that franchises survive instead of being shelved due to low sales because people couldn't get through it. Much like the shift in seeing audiobooks as a legitimate form of reading, we should recognize Rewind as a natural evolution of saving, a tool that helps us experience games we might not otherwise have endured. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go read on audiobook.